Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, good day, good night, good morning, good wherever you are. My name is Thomas Sheridan and you're listening to The Velocity of Now, exclusively on Type 1 Radio. And here we are at our third show. Amazing, we have 3 shows already. Apparently I'm told by the producers that the viewing numbers are literally going through the roof. So, that's just absolutely fantastic. I'm delighted that so many people are listening in. I'm delighted that so many people are taking an interest, and I'm delighted that word of mouth is spreading the show around. I see there seems to be quite a buzz developing about it, and I'm very happy about this. I wasn't sure what to expect. The first week I was on, I would have been happy if 50 people were listening in. Turns out there was like 600 were listening live, and now we're up to like a couple of thousand. So it's just amazing. So thank you for that. It's spreading like wildfire. Again, this is the Velocity of Now. My name is Thomas Sheridan. My website is thomassheridanarts.com, and that's your one-stop shop, as James Corbett would say, or your portal, or whatever you want to call it, to hundreds of pages of information, free videos, music, tons of art, which you're very welcome to download once you don't use it commercially. I have no problem with people, right-clicking and downloading my paintings once you don't try to sell them on somewhere. And print them up and frame them. I'm pretty open about that. I'm not a greedy artist that way. And like I said, there's hundreds of pages of information there and useful information. I try to make the website as holistic and open as possible. I'm not specifically locked into one thing or the other, because I think that's what's needed going forward in this life, is a holistic solution to everything. And speaking of which, there's a donate button there if you want to send me a few quid. It will really help a lot. The internet charges are getting more and more expensive. My books are not selling in great numbers, mainly due to the fact that it's the summer, and also I don't get much profit from them anyway. And also it will help keep me on the air, keep the show rolling, and we'll all win in the end, because ultimately knowledge is power. Now, I know truth should be free, but administration, hard work, and research isn't. And neither is entertainment, and that's what I want to do on this show. I want to entertain people. So anything you could do to help me there would be fantastic. thomassheridanarts.com. Now, it's been an interesting week here. It's been boiling hot. It's been really, really strange, the weather. I cannot remember weather like this ever in Ireland. I can remember very hot summers when I was a kid, but it would always cool down at night. It would always cool down in the evenings. As soon as the sun went down at 9, 10 o'clock at night, it would always cool down. It's not like that now. It's more like the heat that you get in the tropics. When the sun goes down at night, it actually gets hotter. Well, it seems to feel hotter. It's very, very strange. It's almost like it's a strange sensation, and I was just talking to the producer, Steve, beforehand about this. and he's down in Brighton, and he can't remember anything like it either. They had 35 degrees down there, and that's beside the sea. And temperatures a bit less than that over here in the northwest of Ireland, but still remarkable temperatures and remarkable humidity. I've been to hot countries, I've lived in hot places, and I know what it's like. And this feels even stranger. A friend of mine from Australia or New Zealand I was talking to tonight was telling me the same thing. He's felt like the heat of Australia and Saudi, and this feels different. It almost feels like you're being microwaved. Now, what's causing that? I don't know. It's, is it just that I've forgotten, or we've forgotten what really hot weather is on these islands after years of terrible summers that were often cold and miserable? Or has the Earth moved into a new place in the galaxy, and maybe there's more energy, it's highly energized? It sometimes feels like that. And it's very strange. Like when I fly in airplanes these days and I close my eyes, I see millions and millions of these like dots bouncing around in front of my eyes, and they look like radiation or something. And it's only something I've noticed in the last year or so that they've appeared in the numbers they have. And it reminds me very similar to what the Apollo astronauts and the shuttle astronauts claimed to experience in the cabs, when they got near the Van Allen radiation belt outside, the Earth's protective layer. They would describe the same thing, like there was dots and millions of sparkles of lights in their eyes. So is the Earth becoming more irradiated? Is this a result of Fukushima and other accidents? Have there been accidents they haven't told us about? We know they're using depleted uranium in the Middle East, and in Persia and that part of the world, and we don't know where else they're using it. And that stuff does have a knock-on effect. It does spread. So whatever it is, we're having a very, very hot and very intense and very humid summer for the first time I've ever experienced in Ireland. The novelty is starting to wear off now. It'll cool down a little bit this morning, but right now I can feel the heat coming in. Again, they'll use this to sell the global warming thing. We've had 4 or 5 years of terrible summers where it was literally cold, and that was proof of global warming. And now we'll finally have one summer where it was warm, and they're going to say, well, this is proof of global warming, and now you have to fess up those carbon taxes. They'll always spin it in the way they want because the globalists are obsessed with getting in your pockets. A lot of it has to do with getting your money, even though that's not real anyway, because money is just basically created out of thin air. But they also want to tax you for the reason that money has a psychological hold upon you. If you work X hours a week and they charge you bedroom tax, broadcasting taxes, property taxes, and all manner of taxes, not to mention the fines you get from speeding and so on, it has a detrimental effect upon your psychology. It makes you wonder what the hell you're working for. It makes you wonder what you're striving for, if it's only going to be taken from you, literally by people who don't need it. That's the most amazing thing about it. They literally just don't need it. But they take it anyway because they know it has a psychological detrimental effect. And as a result, it has a neurological and also a physiological effect. They say the only things that are certain in life are death and taxes. I'd like to meet the psychopath who made that one up. Speaking of death and taxes, there's all kinds of taxes that are, foisted upon us. There's monetary taxes, there's behavioral taxes, there's psychological taxes, and there's spiritual taxes. Spiritual taxation, the oldest trick in the book is to tell a person that they have to pay up or they won't get into heaven. And they all do it. You have to join this religion and you have to submit to certain indulgences or sacrifice. And that's your path to the afterlife. And this week, the Pope, the current Pope, whatever he is, whatever his name is, Pope, whatever, he said that if people followed him on Twitter or twittered him, they would get into out of purgatory and into heaven. Purgatory being a sort of a Catholic intermediary state between heaven and hell. Apparently, that's where unbaptized babies go, and people who weren't quite evil but weren't quite good, they go to purgatory. So you can get your relatives and yourself out of purgatory if you Twitter the Pope. So immediately I went onto Twitter and I twittered. I asked him a question. I said, "Twitter or Vaseline," to see whether that would help me get out of purgatory. And immediately I was blocked by the Vatican. So they've no sense of humor either. They've no sense of irony. I often think it's amazing that these people can commit paedophilia on an industrial scale, and that's before we even get to things like the Magdalene laundries here in Ireland, and the child trafficking and the illegal adoptions and all the other nonsense and the banking fraud and everything else these people are up to. And yet these psychopaths tell us that our way to get into heaven, our way of salvation, is to Twitter the Pope. Well, that just to me shows, if you honestly do that and you honestly believe that, you've really got a spiritual crisis in there, because God doesn't need your Twitters if there's such a thing as God. And salvation is open to everyone. The thing is, you have to find it yourself. Now, speaking of priests and Twittering, I often think it's amazing that Ireland doesn't have the best fast runners in the world, the best sprinters in the world, all the practice that Irish boys and girls get running away from priests. But speaking of running away, there was an interesting story this week in Dublin that happened, and on numerous levels this is interesting. And it's one I want to talk about because it's a microcosm of where we are right now, where we're going, and it also is a good idea for us to examine this story that happened this week in Dublin in order to understand how politicians in all countries and how activism in all countries can progress forward. This is from the Irish Daily Mirror, and it happened on Wednesday, and I didn't buy this paper. What I do is I take them out of pubs and stuff at the end of the night. I won't give any money to Murdoch or anyone else. But what basically happened was a group of protesters from the Dublin Says No group ascended on a well-known pub, a very posh, well, not a very posh, but a well-known pub in the centre of Dublin, very close to the government building, that has played a long part in, shall we say, political intrigue in this country. Basically, if you wanted a corrupt government person to do anything for you, you went to this pub and you met him there. It was also where things like Irish economic policy would be developed. I'm not kidding you, where top civil servants would meet these sort of like bullshitting economists and actually develop the economy going forward. It was literally like something like Father Ted for many years. And then they moved into high-end bistros, like they did in every other country. But they always tried to maintain the thing that our politicians are great guys, that just like, no one have a point with them. They're just like the rest of us. That's always been a big thing in Ireland. And this week, Garda, that's the Irish police, were called last night after protesters faced Pat Rabbitte, who's the Minister for Communications, in a central Dublin pub. The Communications Minister was having a pint in the pub when dozens of anti-austerity demonstrators stormed in. A source close to the Minister said they spotted Pat. You see, they always use the first name here. Very sneaky. That's one thing they've done to us in Ireland. Make us call our politicians by their first name to make them think they're one of us, one of the lads. And his advisors, there you go, coming out of government buildings. Pat went inside to get away from them. They came inside and started shouting in his face, "Shame on you," and screaming, "Run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, run, run." The Troika is basically the IMF kind of like robber barons who come here to basically implement the next levels of slavery that the Irish people are to be subjected to punish the Irish people for the corruption, failure, and incompetence, and basically psychopathology of the Irish political and business classes. The Troika were upstairs, and they were angrily screaming at the minister about dining with European bureaucrats. Garda removed the protesters from the pub. Public expenditure, Minister Brendan Howlin was upstairs meeting with the officials from the European Central Bank, European Commission and the IMF. Finance Minister Michael Noonan and his top officials arrived later. So basically you had all the people who were responsible for the misery that Ireland is in were meeting upstairs in this pub. The protesters went in. They didn't do anything illegal. They just did basically a shouting match. But this is the kind of protest that works. It's more of like a PR stunt, and a very clever one, because the majority of Irish people wouldn't have known that these globalists were meeting upstairs in this pub. And just by causing a little bit of a ruckus, not breaking any laws, the protesters beautifully highlighted this story, and that the upstairs at this pub was basically a brothel full of the biggest whores on the planet. So to me, that was just brilliant. That was brilliant. But following that, damage control comes in, and it's a great way of understanding how all the systems in our countries work. The first thing that happened was on a popular Irish website that I'm aware of, it's quite popular now, it's absolutely loaded with government officials, shills, and other political insiders, were saying things like, every Irish man deserves a pint in peace, and a line has been crossed. I mean, crap like that, patronising crap like that. They were accusing the protesters of being involved with the IRA, calling them, they're literally called them terrorists. It was coming that far, and it was just, you could see the fear, but you could also see how the spin doctors had been, manoeuvred and mobilized into position to, do damage control on the internet. What they were trying to do was take the focus away from the fact that the protesters beautifully highlighted the fact that the IMF and the ECB troika were upstairs, and then put the blame on the protesters. So the next day in the same paper, the Irish Mirror, another rag, it has a picture of Pat Rabbitte. Now let me tell you about Pat Rabbitte. Pat Rabbitte is the communications minister. There's an article about him I just wrote on my site this week. He's basically an Orwellian inner party member in just about every way. He ran for election on certain promises. His party did, the Labour Party. And when they didn't deliver the promises on TV, he basically said that, well, isn't lying when you're running for election what you do, with a smug look, a smug look on his face. So the next day in the Mirror, there's a picture of Pat with the usual, shit-eating grin look on his face. And it says, Pat Rabbitte yesterday hit out the professional protesters. Now, what does that mean, professional protesters? Is the only people allowed to make money from politics, economics, politicians, journalists, they're professionals. These people are amateurs. So he immediately throws in the word professional. It's a word that doesn't mean nothing. It's typical gaslighting word salad. It means absolutely nothing. But professional just thrown in there willy-nilly to try and influence public opinion. The communications minister called in the cops on Wednesday after up to 50 demonstrators faced off at him in the Dublin pub. The incident was filmed and shows the group screaming and shouting at the minister, and he appears unfazed by it. Speaking yesterday, Mr. Rabbitte said, the funny thing was that they missed the real focus of the protest. The Troika were upstairs with the Public Expenditure Minister, Brendan Howlin, and the Finance Minister, Michael Noonan. Now, how disgusting is that? You see, this was hidden from the public. The protesters brought this into the open, and then suddenly Pat Rabbitte and the government tried to take ownership of the fact that the Troika, the IMF crowd were upstairs, because they had been unable to keep this little secret quiet. And if they don't want Irish people knowing that, these events are taking place casually in pub, which will impose the next round of draconian austerity and taxes upon us. And it's hidden. The protesters, God bless you, did the right thing. They brought attention to it, and then he tries to take ownership of it back. And this is typical of a typical politician like Rabbitte. It's typical of how they think and behave. You get it in the UK, you get it in Britain, you get it everywhere. They'll deny something and then they'll try to take ownership of it. Pat Rabbitte, just to let you know, he wants to introduce, he'll probably get it to, a TV broadcasting fee, which is essentially a tax to keep the National Propaganda Agency, RTE, still in business. It's €180 a year, which is quite a substantial sum for every household in the country. And get this, deaf and blind people will not be excluded from it. And that's the kind of things that were being decided upstairs in that pub before these professional protesters came along and basically showed what's really going on. And who meets upstairs in bars? Gangsters. That's basically what it was. It was a combination of a brothel and a gangster's den. So well done, the protesters there. You'll get no grief from me. Now, I also did another show this week. I did a radio show. I think it was on Wednesday night. It was very late, it was very hot, and I was very tired, but I still really enjoyed it. Vinnie Eastwood, down in Auckland, New Zealand, in his infinite wisdom, brought myself, James Corbett, and Jay Widener together to do a talk on psychology. I'll put the links again in the show page when it's up. It's very much well worth hearing this talk, because basically I don't think a lineup like this has really been assembled before, not to talk about this issue. And what was amazing was that we basically all came to the same agreement. We came to the same conclusions about the psychopathic system, how non-compliance is the way forward. It's no point voting. It's no point trying to reform a system that's completely twisted. The best you can do is to try and skirt around the margins, survive for yourself, and find ways to exist outside it. It's essentially what I've been saying about when you have a psychopathic individual in your life, it's no contact ever again. And that was the consensus of the show. And also, one more I was delighted to hear both James and Jay bring up is that humor and satire is probably the best way to deal with them. I've been doing that for years. 15 years ago, I was doing it with the troubles in Northern Ireland. Me and some other people were ripping the piss out of the Loyalists and the Republicans up there, and in the Irish government down south, and the British government. Nobody was safe. And it was before I actually pinned the psychopathic thing down, although I kind of knew it was. I think I was calling them sociopaths at the time. But I used to, it was the best way of dealing with it back then. And that satire is so powerful. But people don't know how powerful satire is. You can really demolish the greatest bully with satire, or the greatest tyrant with satire. I often wondered if people in Germany laughed at the brown shirts and Hitler, rather being in fear of them, would we have had a different situation during World War II. I mean, Charles Chaplin, God bless him, he did his best with the wonderful movie The Great Dictator. And that film was a brilliant parody, satirical send-up of Adolf Hitler and the National Socialism of the Third Reich. Yet, of course, the film was banned in both Italy and Germany and other Axis countries like Romania. So the people who really needed to see that film didn't actually get to see it. But everywhere else, it was very effective. Sure, it was propaganda, but it was propaganda that was needed. Very important propaganda. And satire is a great way of taking the psychopaths down, because if you strip away their deviousness and you strip away the damage they do, they're incredibly absurd. They're incredibly absurd and bizarre in how they are. They're like, psychopaths live in a sort of their own version of Craggy Island. It's or a Monty Python sketch. That's literally how they function. It's really the only thing that stops them from, falling completely into absurdity is their pathology and preying upon others. That's the only thing that keeps them going. And if we can point to those things and make fun of them, you could be amazed how much that can actually take him down. Because, like I always say, this radio show is not fear porn. I'm not here to, whip up fear. I'm here to, develop tools and develop methods that we can actually bring this system down in our own way, in our own daily lives. Because there's never going to be a global awakening with everyone sort of like running down the street, waving their arms and, singing, songs. It's not going to happen like that. And it's not going to be this massive overthrow, but there will be what I call a breakthrough, and the breakthrough will happen one person at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time, one club, one organization, etc., one company at a time. This is why I'm a big supporter of small business. I always try to help small startup business companies, especially by young people or family businesses. It's very important to me personally. That's why I'm always a firm believer in spending money as much as you can cash locally for the same reason. And satire, if we do it properly, can really, really damage these fools, because they don't know how to hand to it. A psychopath does not get complex satire. They just don't. They don't get the complexity of satire. So they would watch something like, Monty Python or some kind of surrealist comedy like that, and they laugh, but they don't really know why they're laughing. They just know this is the scene that I'm supposed to laugh in. Or they look around and they wait for others to laugh, and then they join in, because they don't get it. Because, like I've always been saying, there's a fundamental personality defect in there in terms of a self-identity. And humor comes from life experience. Most humor is it's self-observational when you think about it. You'd see something when The Simpsons was in its heyday, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the jokes were so good that you could, and they were so good is because we could see that happening in the world all around us. We could see those kinds of things taking place. And we knew that in our own lives, we'd done that. We had done those stupid things. And that self-reference is what made us understand that humor. But psychopaths do not get complex satire because they do not self-reference, because everything to them is a target, an operation, or something to be manipulated. Everything is a process or a function. This is why they're obsessed, as Jay Widener said the other night, they're obsessed with hierarchy and centralization. They cannot handle anything coming at them with a curveball. They don't understand it. They literally do not get it. You could give them a copy of, Viz magazine, or, you give them a DVD of Steve Hughes and Bill Hicks, and they wouldn't get it. They would just see dirty words, or they would just see excuses to sort of point the finger at them people and say, oh, that's what they're really like. That's really the psychopath projecting. The psychopath always projects. If a psychopath calls you a con artist and a criminal, that's because that's what they are. And it's the same thing with the humor. They don't get complex satire, and they try to turn it around. But because they don't get it, that makes the satire so powerful. Again, this is why the court jester, bless him, was the one who would probably die of old age in the court. While the kings and the queens and everyone else all were assassinated and killed off, and all the psychopaths in the court went about their games and shenanigans, but who survived? The fool. Just like in The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien shows us that the foolish hobbits, Merry and the other one, they were foolish hobbits. They were absurd, they were silly, but they were childlike, innocent, silly. They weren't out to hurt anybody, and that helped them survive, because there's a skill set in that too as well. There's a skill set in the ability to laugh. I remember I grew up in a very tough neighborhood, and literally there was the potential to be beat up every day. And until I learned how to fight back, I used to get away with so much because I could do two things. I was good at singing, and I was good at telling jokes. And I could make up funny songs. I could make up song parodies. And I still do that today for friends and stuff like that. Jokey sort of song parodies based on, Barry White songs or, Noel Coward songs. I still do it, and it's because it's so, it brings so much joy to people, and it relieves chemicals in the brain like dopamine that make everyone bond and they make everyone feel good. Because it's absolutely true that laughter is not only the best medicine for your physiology, but it's the best method for taking down the psychopaths in society. We all have to be the slaves whispering in the woodsheds, because those whispers in the woodshed will be the jokes, the satire, the send-ups, the wind-ups that will take them down. Look at Father Ted. Anyone on these islands will be familiar with the TV show Father Ted. It literally demolished the Catholic Church in Ireland because it didn't particularly do anything that was outrageous. All it did was take a mirror and point it back at the Catholic Church and say, this is a microcosm. Okay, it's a farcical microcosm, but this is a microcosm of how you are. And it did it without being vicious or cruel. There was an element of sympathy for the priests, well, except Bishop Brennan. But for the rest of them, there was an element of sympathy that was given there. That was like, this is their absurdity. And we all change and we all learn from that. And so that show, again, I'll put the links on the webpage. It was the Whitney Eastwood show with myself, James Corbett, and Jay Widener. And our solutions for overcoming the psychopathic situation is get away from every psychopath you know. Do not comply with the psychopathic system as much as you can. I know it's very difficult because they have us by the short and curlies. Do not try to reform, compromise, bargain with them, change them, say your prayers and hope they'll get better, because it will not happen. And then undermine their authority, their pathology, their fascism. See, this is why they created political correctness, because political correctness was created to stop psychopaths in power from being made jokes at or laughing at, because it would have undermined their globalist plans to break up the family, to break up societies, to flood cultures with immigrants, so the indigenous culture would be smashed up and broken. We've got to take that back. We should ignore political correctness. Don't tell cruel jokes to hurt people. Tell jokes and spread jokes that will actually make people laugh, because I laugh at Irish jokes. I laugh at Irish jokes for the simple reason I know they're not true. And that's just the reality. I know they're not true. I know I'm not a thick paddy. I know I'm not a mad Catholic. I know I'm not a sheepshagger. So the jokes make me laugh. They're funny too. And they also keep you grounded, because if you can't laugh at yourself, you're probably a psychopath. Now we're going to go to the first song. It's In This Moment by Neater.
Will you hear words strike a chord in your heart? And oh, dark shines in the dark.
That was Neater, and In This Moment, a sweet tune that was. I really like that. So, last week, I had my first sort of controversial experience on the air. And whether it was the intelligence services monitoring the calls or the show, or whether it was, I don't know, radio interference. I'm open to everything. Or what if it was indeed electronic voice phenomena? I don't know, but whatever it was, it's pretty weird. It's pretty weird on numerous levels. Some people said they were hearing it during the show, the entire show, but I listened. They didn't know it wasn't during the entire show. It really began before I started talking about the Jimmy Savile segment. And it became increasingly louder the more I became emotionally involved in the story, which is interesting of itself. It became more pronounced in terms of where it showed up on the audio recording. Now, I didn't hear it on my end here, and I don't think the producers heard it on their end. Some people said they heard it live, but it became out very pronounced on the radio recording. Now, what was interesting, some people who know a lot about audio engineering and things like that went in and they looked at the signal, and they said that, from what they could tell, the signal and the audio was there. And when I spoke or when music was played, there was the audible, the sine wave, the audio signal was there. But when these, shall we say, mysterious sounds appeared, the noticeable audio signal, even though some of them were as loud as my speaking voice, they did not register as audio signals. It was almost like they were sounds that were coming from outside the electromagnetic spectrum, as weird as that sounds, but were still being heard and recorded. Let that one sink in for a minute. And I saw the screenshots that some of the people out there kindly sent me, and the audible signal is not there. More interesting is how they seem to peak at specific points. And there's almost an element of agitation in these voices, like the voices or the sounds are trying to tell me something. Tell me to shut up, or tell me to reveal more. Now, I'm very interested in this whole idea of electronic voice phenomenon now, and I've been reading up on it ever since. That was a motorcycle, by the way. That wasn't anything unearthly. And the electronic voice phenomenon does seem to have very strange things attached to it. It was first discovered in the 1950s by a guy, I think it was in Norway, who was recording wild bird song, and he was just pointing his microphone at these birds, and when he played the tape back, to his astonishment, there was another voice, even though he was alone at the time, who was describing the various attributes of the birds, how they nested, where they lived, what their breeding seasons was, and so on. Again, he didn't hear it, but it still ended up on the tape. They probably didn't have the technical ability back then to see if there was actual traceable audio signal on it. But the voices was there. Not only that was it clearly audible, but the voices were also speaking in a dialect of Norwegian that was no longer spoken in the region. Another thing too is that while this was going on, while I was talking about the Savile serial killer theory, which I have put out there, and even right now as it's happening, so it might be a good time to play this tape back, I had I've got it really strong right now, a sense of I was being watched. A sense that there was somebody in my space. I'm alone in this room here. And like someone was on my back. I feel it very strongly right now. And it only happened since I brought up the name Jimmy Savile. Now, there is a phenomenon called, the sense of being watched. It's been very well studied by Rupert Sheldrake and some others. Am I being watched literally? For instance, is there someone from the intelligence services interrupting this signal, listening to it, looking for trigger words and certain phrases that they feed into their like anti-terrorist, audio database. I don't know. I do seem to have a lot of trouble, particularly in the last year, with interrupted calls and interrupted radio signals. But this show seems to be quite clear. And right now, I feel the sensation incredibly strong. So I don't know what that means, if this is a psychological state I'm putting myself into. But I feel very strongly that these women in the Yorkshire Ripper case, or the 666 murder case, as I called it, have never received proper justice because they were mocked in death as on life. There was an element that they were deserved it because any woman on the street at night was no better than a prostitute. This is why the cops in South and West Yorkshire were obsessed with finding prostitutes. Same thing. And so I spent the week reading the books and looking at the photographs of these women, and I felt very, driven to have their story fully resolved, because I still think the people involved in the cover-up of who was helping Sutcliffe are still alive, and they know it. And I think that's the real reason the BBC sex scandal was put out there as a cover story, to take away from what was really going on. So I won't talk about this much more. We can probably at some point, I want to bring guests on the shows, and we can find someone who knows a lot about electronic voice phenomena. Maybe they can explain some more. But I want people to know that when you enter into the public domain, as I have, you have a shift in consciousness that's very difficult to explain. Firstly, you have to develop a thick skin, because you're going to have people who don't know you, never met you, saying the most horrific things about you, telling the most appalling lies about you, distorting every word you say in order to harvest energy from you. That these parasites are not really a main problem, but you do feel psychic attacks. You do. I can honestly say, in front of some witnesses, I was actually psychically attacked by talking about the archons in a friend's apartment in Yorkshire last year. And I could never explain the experience, but it literally felt like I'd been picked up and put into a microwave. So I'll just end this right now by saying that I do have a belief in these things, but I also don't believe everything I hear. I don't necessarily subscribe to theories. My life is an ongoing series of investigations, and it's very few things that, unless I see them very clearly before my eyes, hold them in my hands, or hear them with my ears, I don't generally assume them all to be fact. And even then you can't judge it, because we know we're living in a sort of a virtual reality. This got me looking at the idea of skeptics and stuff. So while I was online, I was looking at some of these skeptics sites, and they were very interesting. I agree with what a lot of skeptics say, to be honest with you. I have to say that I do. I think it's healthy. And that's why I say people who are interested in, paranormal stuff should read skeptic books. And likewise, people who are skeptical or, into, heavily debunkers and stuff, they should read, the books written by the paranormal and the alternative, because that's where you get a clear picture. You're balanced. There's no point being all locked into one side or the other. You have to constantly keep self-referring, and so you don't make a fool of yourself one day by saying the pyramids are built by aliens. You have to be very careful with this stuff. But what was interesting was I could definitely see on the sites there were real professional moles. It was the most amazing thing. Until recently, I had no idea at the amount of time, effort, and money that goes into having moles, spies, and spooks from the intelligence services, from universities, from government buildings, invading en masse internet forums and trying to destroy any kind of alternative discussion that doesn't revolve around a government, corporate, university, or big pharma press release. It's the most amazing thing. And you could actually see how they're actually, and it's been shown really that these people were paid to do this. There was an article that came out recently where someone admitted that he'd been paid to actually do this online. any kind of dissent or non-conformist opinion, they just shoot it down. But what's interesting is they play both sides of the argument in some cases. You can start spotting them that there's a protagonist-antagonist kind of aspect to it. You know, when a mainstream opinion is brought in, a non-mainstream opinion, you can see how they spin it off. If it's something really politically radical, economically dangerous, they try to spin it off towards aliens and stuff like that. They'll actually start saying, you know, you go onto websites that were actually things that have to do with very, you know, real world, real events that affect your people's lives. And suddenly some guy would start posting links to UFO sites and alien abduction sites and things like that, and trying to spin it off into the land of that stuff. And you can see how it worked both ways. And then other guy might go onto a site that's genuinely interested in things like explorations of consciousness, explorations of the human condition. And they do it again. They'll do it in the other way. They will spin it off into, you know, skepticism and debunkery. They play both sides. Very clever, very devious. And when a genuine discussion happens, you can always tell it. It's one of those things you can see online. That's what makes a really good, open discussion on the internet so interesting, because when it's genuine, and they're becoming harder and harder to have because of all the moles and the spooks, they can be some of the most fascinating reading and some of the best educations you can ever get. There's a technique within neurolinguistic programming called hypnotic dual induction technique, where metaphors enter the human subconscious from both sides. One is telling you the truth, one is speaking in metaphor or telling you lies. What eventually happens is you shut down and you forget everything you've been told. And that's what I think they're doing on these boards. So, I'm not Mr. Skeptic, I'm not Mr. Paranormal, I'm in the middle, but I know when things make sense and things don't. And I also think you should have a healthy sense of humor when it's, again, like everything else in life, when approaching this stuff. You should have a healthy sense of humor to looking at this stuff. So I started channeling to see if channeling was real. And I had some surprising results. And I'm now about to channel. In about a minute from now, I'm about to channel. I have to get my equipment set up. Hold on. This is very serious shit now, okay? I have to get myself right. And I've had connections with beings who weren't me, with beings who were in the future, with beings who were telling me things that were amazing. And I believe that if you listen to me, you will get the keys to salvation. Forget the Pope and his Twitter. Forget all that shite. You must follow me. You must follow me and my channeling. So right now, I'm going to count down to 10. And in 10 seconds, that I will go from this state into my channeling state, and I shall begin to channel. I will be ready to channel. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let the channeling begin.
This next part of the show, I've been hesitant about putting alive on the air because for the last few weeks I have been channeling beings from beyond, from the supernatural world, and these beings have really manifested, and I feel I have a destiny now to channel beings, to channel entities, so I can help the world realize just how special I am, because I'm the only hope for the world. That's what these beings tell me. And so I had a revelation last night that I would channel a being live on air. This is the first time it's ever been done on alternative radio. Yes, I know you think I'm Mr. Mr. Rational, but until this channeling started working, I now no longer believe that there's not a supernatural world. I'm quite frightened and disturbed by it, but I'm going to do this live on air. The machine, the device I'm using to channel the beings is a Fisher-Price activity set. I found this was the most reliable for contacting beings. I call it my harmonic portal. So I'm about to channel a being right now. I must get into the mood to channel the being. Hold on. Is there anybody there? Is there anybody there from beyond?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh my God! Could you please identify yourself?
I am Ra.
You're the Egyptian god Ra.
I am Ra. Are you deaf?
Why are you so angry?
I am not angry. I am absolutely relieved.
You're relieved?
Yes.
Well, why are you so relieved talking to me?
I thought it was Sheridan again.
So Ra, now that I have you, I wasn't expecting you at all. I'm quite shocked. But I have to ask you this question. I believe that David Wilcock claims that he can channel you live. David Wilcock channels you. And there's a video on YouTube of him channeling you. Can you confirm if he is actually channeling you?
Yes, the human you know as Wilcock is in earthly communication with me.
Oh my God, I'm really surprised to hear that. I think, like most people, I thought he was making it up and he was just putting on a silly voice and pretending he was talking to Ra.
No, he was talking to me for real. Why do you doubt me?
Well, he said that on December 21st, 2012, we would all ascend to be light beings. It didn't happen.
It did happen.
But how come I'm still here?
You, Sheridan, were left behind.
Oh, okay. What do I do to attain a light body, just like he said?
Go on a diet, you fat bastard.
Oh, okay. Now that I have you here, I would like to ask you about the Pope this week. He said that if you Twitter him, you'll get out of purgatory. I think it's a bit much.
Believe me, you would want to get out of purgatory too.
Oh, so it's a real place. I just assumed, they made that stuff up.
Purgatory is very real, and you do not want to be there. It is the New Jersey of the afterlife.
Okay, so purgatory is the New Jersey of the afterlife. Okay, Ra. So the Twittering thing, it does work. It's I just find that amazing that I thought all the supernatural stuff was just all made up. Well, not the supernatural stuff, but the religious stuff. I'm very honoured to be here talking to you in the afterlife. Can you tell me about what the Egyptian afterlife is like?
The Egyptian afterlife is very different than your earthly domain. There is only love. There is no gravity. And we have a different transmission system on the Toyota Corolla.
Okay, this has taken a lot out of me, Ra. I'll have to say goodbye.
I am Ra!
Yeah, I know, I heard that the first time. So, thank you, whatever you are, your divinity, and this has been an amazing experience for me, and I will now switch off the Fisher-Price activity set and end this channeling transmission.
Go on a diet, you fat bastard!
You wanna charge £30 hackney to barking. You're mad mate, you made a tin foil. We can run our vehicles on vegetable oil. You wanna trip in my taxis, show you where I go. Charge me discreetly, nobody will know about us. Don't make a fuss, the world is safe for what we've got. Choose us, believe us when we're telling you it's for your own good. We hide the new technologies, man, we thought you understood. don't get many choices. You're mad, mate, you haven't got a clue. When we stand together, there is nothing they can do. So show them what you're feeling, show them what they miss. Can't you see the economic terrorist? He doesn't have a turban, he'll never wear a beard. He will run you ragged and reduce you to tears. Now believe us when we're telling you it's all a massive con. The people who we trust in seem to do us only wrong. No matter who you're voting for, the government always wins and leaves us here to justify these 7 deadly sins. Uh-oh, you're taking the piss again and again, you're not listening. You're leaving us all in the shade. Inflation rises to cover the lives you made. Uh-oh, you're taking the piss again and again, you're not listening. You want justice on a plate, but it's our indifference that keeps us in this state. Oh, keeps us in this state. Taking the piss again and again, you're not listening. You're leaving us all in the shade. Inflation rises to cover the lives you made. Uh-oh, you're taking the piss again and again, you're not listening. You want justice on a plate. Oh, you're taking the piss again and again, you're not listening. You're leaving us all in the shade. Inflation rises to cover the lives you made. Uh-oh, you're taking the piss again and again, you're not listening. You want justice on a big white light, but it's our indifference that keeps us in this state. Keeps us in this state. Keeps us in this state.
And that was Taking the Michael by Super Luckies.